The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
I am Emily Swallow, also known as the Armorer on The Mandalorian. And I'm just giving a little shout out to the Secrets of Star Wars podcast because this is the way.
You're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars episode 171.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Hey everyone, I'm Angela Sealana, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, where we talk about everything connected to that galaxy far, far away. From movies to books to TV shows and more, we're talking about the deeper themes and meanings found in Star Wars. Today, we are diving into the third episode in the Ahsoka series, and our crew consists of, first of all, we've got old Ben, Mike Creavey. Hiya, Mike.
Hello there.
Oh, good to hear that again. And
it's been a while.
Welcome back to Thomas Salerno, who shall henceforth be known as Master Ikrit.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be here. I wonder how many people will get my Deep Cut Legends reference moniker.
Well, Thomas, some of our listeners may know you from SQPN's other podcasts, especially Secrets of Middle-earth. But since you just joined the crew of The Secrets of Star Wars last episode, we also expect you to be around for a longer time. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your connection to Star Wars?
Yeah, so again, I'm on Secrets of Middle-earth, Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. I've been a fan of SQPN and particularly of this podcast for Secrets of Star Wars for a while. In terms of my relationship with Star Wars, I think it goes back to when the first time I ever saw Star Wars was when A New Hope was re-released for the 20th anniversary in 97 in theaters. I saw that with my best friend at the time, but then really didn't. It's funny, that's the first time I saw Star Wars, but I really became a Star Wars fan when the special editions were released on VHS. Because my brother and I watched those over and over and over again. And it's always interesting because I like to thank my younger brother for being the Star Wars fanboy first. I liked Star Wars, but it was really his thing. And when brothers compete, it's like, oh, well, like Star Wars is kind of your thing. And I pretended to not like it. But secretly, I was this mega Star Wars fan. And of course, as you grow older, you grow out of that, at least in our case, that sibling rivalry thing. So we've enjoyed Star Wars for years and years together. Saw the prequels in theaters when they came out, saw the sequels, loved it, have been loving these shows that have come out. And we still talk Star Wars incessantly. Like anyone who knows me or my brother knows that if you put the two of us in a room together, we will probably talk Star Wars for at least an hour, like at least. And if no one stops us, like we'll just go on and on and on. But yeah, Star Wars is probably my second favorite fictional world after Tolkien's Middle-earth. And some days it's almost equal to it. I just love science fantasy. I love the sort of fantasy in space aesthetic of Star Wars. And I've also, as a bookworm, I've been reading the Star Wars books for a long time. I can't claim to have read all of them, but my little moniker, Master Ikrit, comes from a Jedi Master from the old Legends continuity, Ikrit. He's kind of this little fuzzy animal-looking Jedi. He was trained by Yoda, and he appears in the Junior Jedi Knights novels, which were some of the first Star Wars novels I ever read. They're about Luke's Jedi Academy that he founds on Yavin 4. And I just like Ikrit. I think he's a fun character. He's one of those non-humanoid Jedi. You know, we have so many humanoid Jedi, very few like Yoda and Ikrit who are non-humanoid. And Ikrit has kind of this sort of, like Yoda, he doesn't like to use a lightsaber. He likes non-violent conflict resolution. And I've always just liked him as a character. And I love obscure Star Wars references because the other thing I did as a kid was consume those essential Star Wars guides where they had like all the facts about the ships and planets and stuff. So I'm glad to be here finally on Secrets of Star Wars so I can geek out about this awesome universe with you all.
Yes, sir. Well, we're geeking out about apparently several galaxies now.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm getting nervous. No.
But yeah, so getting into this week's episode, part 3, which is called Time to Fly. We are finding ourselves in some politics as well as some space battles and some force training. So basically, just, you know, if you're listening now, you should have watched the episode. So I'm just going to give you a 1-sentence summary here just to remind you, for those of you who may be listening far, far into the future. Hera tangles with New Republic politics while Ahsoka and Sabine Wren voyage to a distant planet. That's from StarWars.com. And might I add, Hu Yang scans the Eye of Sion slower than your 2006 HP printer scanner, because that's what I really felt.
Yeah.
I felt that in my bones. Okay. All those times when you're just like, please, would you hurry up? Okay, so before we dive in, we want to give a brief shout out and thank you to the folks that make this podcast possible, our patrons, including Nicole H., Carl H., Chris S., Darren W., and Pamela F. And if you want to help StarQuest continue our mission, please consider becoming a patron like these awesome folks at sqpn.com/give. All right, so guys, what were your first impressions overall of part 3? Mike, we'll start with you.
In Hu Yang's defense, I was checking Wikipedia here. Sorry if you hear me typing. Apparently, he was created 25,020 years BBY. So,
okay.
Apparently, so worse than a 2006 HP.
Right. So he's for a model for a computer who's 25,000, I guess 29 years old or something at this point. That's not too bad, I guess. But, there's so much, and we're going to talk about so many things here tonight. I'll keep it brief here. I wrote down, I just keep getting this. I know the word's a little dated now. This was like all the rage like 10 years ago, but like epic kept coming to mind, not just for this episode, but the whole series. And I know I've this is my first time on for anything for this season. But I won't say much about the first 2 episodes, but I think it applies to those too. I just keep really getting this cinematic vibe off it, and I loved Andor, for its own reasons. I love Mandalorian. I love all these live action Star Wars that we get. And I've said many times, nothing's perfect. I've got some issues, some things I would maybe do differently or like to see different. But as I've said many times on the show before the last few years, I'm not going to complain about live action Star Wars like being force fed to me like every few months. I mean, like right. I never thought this would happen until just a few years ago. So suffice to say, that's been a real just joy that we have this content, of course. But with this show specifically, that the word cinematic just keeps coming back to me. It really feels sharp and well done, and it just seems like they didn't really cut any corners with it so far, and I'm looking forward already to the behind the scenes stuff later, and like if they do Disney Gallery on it, because I would just love to learn more about how this came about, and I'm sure we'll get that as we go, but those are my first thoughts.
Thomas, how about you?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Mike said about the epic feel of it. When this episode ended, though, my first reaction was, it was too short. I wanted it to keep going. I believe it's only 40 minutes. It definitely felt, again, to me like a live action Rebels episode in certain aspects. And that was really hitting it out of the park for me. And I just loved... it's funny, for this episode, I loved the character moments more than the action.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even, you know, and I love a good Star Wars action sequences as much as the next guy, but those quiet moments with the characters were what really stood out for me in this episode. And I feel like they're really getting these characters right. You know, obviously Dave Filoni is writing the show, but the actors are doing a really spectacular job. I think I said it last time that you can tell that they've gone through the animated shows and studied their characters so that they know, you know, so it feels consistent to me. It feels like it's the same characters just at a different point in their lives. And I'm just so excited to see more of this story.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say this was probably my favorite episode out of the three. And, you know, now that we've gotten some time to let this series soak in, we're hearing and reading a number of things about, you know, pacing and plot and characters and what everyone's thoughts are on those. Well, so far, talking about the characters, you know, the show has given us, I would say, three main leads: Ahsoka, Hera, and Sabine. And the big bad so far that has been on screen is Morgan Elsbeth. Her main minions include Shin. Obviously, we have Baylan Skoll and this really weird, mysterious character that is behind a mask.
Yeah.
With a million theories about who he might be. We've also gotten, it was cool to get that appearance from Mon Mothma this time around. Male characters, I would include Thrawn there. He's like not on screen, but he's the ultimate menace and he's constantly being discussed. We've also got Ezra Bridger not on screen, but being discussed. And then, of course, Baylan Skoll, who is probably my favorite so far as the new characters. And I would put Hu Yang in there too, right? So one of our other crew members on Secrets of Star Wars, Catherine Laffrey, she had this great comment as we were all talking behind the scenes. And she said, I remembered the stories from my grandmother about how she and her sisters went to war during World War II. And for her, much like Hera, had to raise her sons after the war with no father. And Catherine said, this is post-war Star Wars. Many men are gone. So I thought we could talk about this gender balance, I guess you could say, because it has been brought up. And I don't know if it's new, but at least, you know, talking about it from Catherine's perspective, I'm wondering what you guys think. Do you think this is a reflection on post-war time frame, or does it have any other, you know, origin? Are you noticing it? Just any of your thoughts on that?
Should I start, Thomas?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I know it's an issue for folks out there, and so I've tried to think of this from the standpoint of, well, two things I would say. First of all, I know that there's a broader, I think, kind of concern in our current cultural milieu that a few people have, and I know it's an issue that I do think can be problematic in a lot of media and a lot of movies and stuff, like when it's done directly as some sort of, you know, rebuke of, you know, the importance of the distinction of male and female. He created them, right? Like we look at this from a Catholic perspective, you know, we of course all should, you know, be approaching this from the standpoint of, you know, God has made us unique and different. Like we're not the same, you know, men and women are not the same, but that doesn't mean one's better than the other. And that's, I think, the mistake a lot of people make with all this whole thing, right, in our society, is that if A and B are different, one has to be better than the other. That does not follow. And Dr. Peter Craved has a lot of good stuff on that for those who want to check that out. But when it comes to like Star Wars specifically, my personal view is like I definitely don't think it's as in your face at all as it is in a lot of other things, quite frankly, that I see out there. That sort of someone has to be up and someone has to be down. But with this show, I just kind of disagree, I think, with those who have been particularly concerned about, it's entirely female centric and there's no men. I mean, Angela, you did a great job listing. I was writing it down as you were doing it too before you started. I was like, looks pretty even, just because you haven't seen some of these guys, like you said, we haven't seen Thrawn, haven't seen Ezra except in the hologram, right? And Zeb's out there. Zeb has been introduced in Mandalorian, so I don't really think it's that big of a deal, quite frankly. But to the greater point that Catherine brought up, I think there's a neat idea there, and I wonder if they'll pursue that. But I feel like we see it most directly with Hera, and we know Kanan. Like, they haven't mentioned Kanan. They've shown Hera, they've shown her son. She says that she's lost people. We all know that. I do wonder for the casual observer who's not familiar with Rebels, which
right.
I feel like a lot of people watching this have seen Rebels, or like my wife has me, who she's very patient with. It's like, okay, well, hon, you have to know. Oh, this is perfect. There's this guy, Kanan. I happen to have this action figure of Kanan literally right next to me. That was so perfect. You guys can't see this, but here he is. It's like, he's not been referenced. Angela kind of talked me down a little bit. I got all excited earlier. I was like, maybe he'll be in a flashback, but she made a good point that might diminish a little bit. So yeah, I think that could be part of it, that we had the death toll. I think in Star Wars in general, it seems like there's a little more balance between men and women in the broader lore, right? Like serving and fighting and perhaps dying. So I don't know percentages, but one way or another, we all these people have lost a lot of people. And so far we're just focused on like Ahsoka and Sabine and Hera. Like, I don't really see what the big deal is with that. There's lots of other people, but they're who the story's about right now. So I just don't think it's that big of a deal, personally.
I definitely felt Kanan's absence in that scene with Hera and Jason, and it was obviously intentional. And that's the thing. I think what some people are missing is that the absence of some of these, prominent male characters is intentional. It's part of the story. It's part of these characters' arcs. Hera is having to deal with being a single mom raising a kid who's probably gonna be force sensitive, and she's right. Not. And it's like, how am I gonna do this? And he's expressed that he wants to be a Jedi. And of course, Sabine's whole arc is about finding Ezra, her brother figure, and bringing him home. His absence is baked into the story. And yeah, I just didn't have a problem with it. It's for me, it was very much similar to that scene in, I believe it's season 2 of The Mandalorian, where Bo-Katan and Cara Dune and Fennec Shand, other Mandalorian who I can never remember her name, but they all stormed Casca Reeves, thank you.
Why did I remember that? Yes. Oh,
but
man.
They go through
fan point.
Ship. Right. Fan points for you, Mike. I am down 1 point. But no, yeah, they storm the bridge and it's this awesome action sequence.
Yeah.
And I didn't, until it was over and several minutes over, I went, oh yeah, that was an all women action scene. That's awesome.
I was like, my sisters.
It took me a while to realize that, because the scene is so good. It's like it to me, it doesn't matter if it's an all male action scene, all female action scene, what the ratio of characters is. I'm interested in the characters themselves. Are they cool characters? Are they part of a cool story? Do they have interesting character arcs? So for me, this show has just been, and in the first 2 episodes, I didn't realize till it was over. I was like, oh yeah, our 3 major leads are all Star Wars ladies. And that's pretty cool because I like all 3 of these characters. And so, I just didn't pick up on that concern that some people have. And I just think people need to be patient and wait for this story to play out and to see where we're really going with this.
Yeah, thanks for your thoughts on that. I think we'll get into it as we're talking, but certainly each of those 3 have an arc that we're seeing develop before our eyes. And it's fairly early. I mean, we haven't seen very much screen time with them, yet we already have this sense that they're all on some kind of journey, and they all have things that they're internally, feeling and working on. So that's what's making it interesting for me as well. When we begin the episode, we get this great music, and Thomas and I were really kind of geeking out about that. That you hear those wood blocks, right? Those Japanese wood blocks.
Is that what those are?
Yoshigi, yeah.
Nice.
And those are used, which this is kind of a tie-in to the gender thing too, I thought was interesting. So those are used in a variety of different settings. Those can be used in like a children's puppet show. It can be used in sumo wrestling. They use them. But also kabuki theater is really, I think, was probably the idea that Kevin Kiner had. And kabuki theater is the traditional dramatic performance art in Japanese culture. And for at least a few hundred years now, has been performed by only male actors. So it was kind of cool to get this like training sequence at the beginning of a show. And by the way, those instruments are typically used to like get people's attention at the beginning of a performance. So it was really neat to kind of have that tie-in. And then we have these two like female leads that are, we're seeing. And so I thought that was sort of a neat connection. But I don't know if the gender thing really came into it, but just a coincidence, I suppose.
Well, and Ahsoka's wardrobe, and I'm not an expert. I just in terms of visual cues and look, I'm 39 years old. I am fascinated by Japanese culture, but most of my doorway into it was through Ninja Turtles. Okay. And I'm not ashamed of that because I'm not alone in that.
Right.
But the fact is there's like certain motifs and things like, just again, like I wouldn't know the names for the different sort of articles of clothing, but Ahsoka's wardrobe seems to me very influenced by a samurai kind of, samurai films and like a lot of Kurosawa stuff, which he comes up all the time, of course, in Star Wars. I think that there's a real homage going on here with a lot of this. And even in the sabers they were using, or the training sabers, the wooden ones, I forget the name of those. I actually have one of those around here somewhere, but I thought that was kind of cool to see them show up.
Right. Yeah, those are actually kendo practice swords, or
right.
That's what's used in kendo. And I was going to bring this up later, but yeah, let's talk about the training sequence, because the kendo was actually the original inspiration behind lightsaber fighting. So when George Lucas was thinking about how do I want to style the lightsabers, he thought about like Errol Flynn and like the early fencing, on screen, but also he thought about kendo. And the cool thing about kendo is, I guess some people think of it as like doing samurai stuff without actual swords, but what I've learned over time is that kendo is more of a spiritual thing. It's Ken means sword and do means like way, kind of like with a spiritual connotation. So it's really about like training your mind. And I think this is something that it's really underscored in this episode with Sabine. Do you think that she is going to be able to wield the Force? I mean, what are you like? Are you on Hu Yang's side, or are you on Ahsoka's side? Like, what is your vision for Sabine and the Force right now?
You might need to start on this, Thomas.
Yeah, I like what Ahsoka says to Hu Yang later in the episode, where she says, "I don't need Sabine to be a Jedi. I need her to be herself." And I sort of agree with Ahsoka on that. That even if it turns out Sabine is not sensitive enough with the Force to actually wield it, I think that this training and regimen in terms of discipline and calming her sort of natural Mandalorian fiery impulsiveness, is good for her. It's good to have this this training, this balance. I think it's molding her into a more well-rounded person, into a more effective hero. And I think anyone could, Force sensitive or not, benefit from some benefit from some aspects of the Jedi training. And I just think, I personally just want Sabine to remain a Mandalorian who, has some Jedi skills, part of the Jedi skill set, but I don't necessarily want her to be an out and out Force wielder. I also like that Ahsoka says that, the Force is in all living things, that everyone has the potential. It's just that not everyone unlocks it. And to me, that jives more with the way the Force was explained in George Lucas's original trilogy.
I agree. I guess I'm sort of just patiently awaiting a little more data because I wrote on the side here, I just wrote down, like, I know other people can talk about this too, like, what is a Jedi kind of at this point? Because it's like, is it, not to be sort of like flip with this, but it's like, is it, you're a member of the club that doesn't exist anymore, or which is neat because of course the Japanese, back to the Japanese culture thing, like the sort of the Ronin motif with all this idea of like, you had this order. I'm on this bent because I finally decided to get down to business and start watching Kurosawa films, but I started with the full like 3.5 hour long version of Seven Samurai, which was a little, I very much enjoyed it, but I had to do it in several sittings. Mm-hmm. But it's just so different. And it was like this whole like world of, you have this code within you, but like the exterior order or sort of chain of command that you were committed to is gone. But what do you do with it? And I mean, like, obviously, like, that's Ahsoka through and through. It was Obi-Wan in some ways. Like, it's a theme that shows up throughout Star Wars, of course. But now I'm just wondering, it's like, yeah, that's part of it, but because you could say that with Sabine, there's like, she's the Mandalorian thing too. Like, she's got a connection there. They're in disarray, and so, but I keep getting hung up on the whole, like, this Force wielding thing. Cause it's like, like the Force is in everybody. Like you were just saying, Thomas, I think that was very like original trilogy, right? This idea, this inspiration, like it could be anybody. But then George, like, that's what's so weird to me is George himself. It wasn't somebody else. It's like George himself who did this whole midichlorian thing with which, I mean, it's real. It's there. They haven't really talked about it much in a while. Like, we have Moff Gideon trying to tap into that, ostensibly for his cloning. The Emperor's doing that. I can feel like I don't really know where we're at now with that, if that makes sense. So it's like, can Sabine tap into it, or is it no, because she's down here on midichlorians, as Hu Yang is like, you are the least qualified person who's ever done this. Like, okay, can I not do it? What's the rule? So yeah, I don't know. I think personally, I think it'd be really cool if she's like got this access and this legacy and this part of her story, but I don't want to see her like, oh, the cup flies into her hand one day. Like, I don't know. I just kind of feel like that wouldn't, in the long run, I don't think I'd be ultimately happy with that. That's kind of where I'm at now.
I was kind of on the edge of my seat with that scene where she was trying to get the cup, because I was like, please don't let her have any,
I was waiting. Like, you guys remember the end of Inception when like the top just moves a tiny bit? Like I was waiting for something like that, like the cup, just a little like did she do it? I don't know.
Yeah, but even then, I think would have been inconsistent.
Right.
Yeah, I just think that there's this thing in modern Star Wars where everybody's got to be a Jedi. like one of the things that bugs me, and I will defend the sequel movies as fun to watch, but one of the things that really bugged me is that they decided to make Finn Force sensitive, and I liked having Finn just be everyman. Right. I didn't need him to be a Jedi, and then they're he can use the Force. I'm like,
they don't really build it up too much either. They're just like, here, it's a thing now. Like,
it's a thing now, and I'm like, why? Okay. I'm like, it doesn't need to be. I'm like, but there's kind of a cool factor, I guess, to it. So, this is a cool character. We'll make them be able to use the Force. But we've also seen Sabine go through some of this training before in Rebels, where she did saber training, very similar to what she's doing with Ahsoka with Kanan. But as she says, you know, she's gotten slack. She hasn't been training in a while, and so she kind of has to learn the basics all over again.
Do you guys think if Rey builds the Jedi Order back up to substantially so they don't have a vocation crisis anymore, they can have like simplex Jedi, you know, like where like they wouldn't let like Father like Solana's Casey, like Blessed Solana's Casey, they're like, okay, you know, but like you can't hear confessions, you know, or like we don't trust you with these things. You can be the doorman, you know, all the while this person is a powerhouse of sanctity. Maybe there's like Jedi who's like, okay, you can't throw stuff across the room with the Force, but like you're really wise, you know, or I don't know.
In Legends, they actually had that. In one of the first Star Wars novels I ever read, there was this thing where like Obi-Wan was, you know, this was before he was with Qui-Gon as a Padawan. He was worried he was going to get shuffled off to the Jedi Agricultural Corps, which is for like low talent Jedi who can kind of speak to plants and help them grow with the Force, but they don't get to be warriors and have a lightsaber and stuff. And he's like, I don't want to do it.
Everybody listening to this with any family who are farmers, we are not.
No, I'm just saying that this was a
oh my gosh,
a rather humorous episode in this Star Wars novel that I read, where they're like, oh, you don't get to be, you know, a warrior. Instead, you'll speak to plants or whatnot. So there have been, you know, Jedi who don't do the whole lightsaber. And that's the thing, though. In the book, they tell Obi-Wan, you know, the Agricultural Corps is really important. It helps feed the galaxy. But of course, Obi-Wan like wants to jet around and fight bad guys. So,
well, what I thought was interesting to kind of bring it back directly is that Ahsoka tells Huyang that the Jedi's methods that he says have, you know, worked for millennia ultimately failed. She says they failed. And that's when she says, I just need Sabine to be herself. So I'm really curious to get more into Ahsoka's head as we're going forward, because, you know, if she thinks the Jedi's methods ultimately failed, I'm wondering, is that reflecting? Obviously, that's reflecting on how the Jedi Council was working during the Clone Wars, et cetera, you know, how they treated her, Anakin, you know.
Right.
But I wonder if she's gotten to this point where she's just questioning everything. Like, you know, when you have that kind of a crisis and you have a crisis of faith, for example. I've known people, you know, been hurt by their religious faith or religious church, whatever. It's easy for that person to just start questioning the whole thing, everything I was ever taught, right? So it's like, if Ahsoka's in this position, what is she going to teach Sabine that she did learn from the Jedi that ultimately she has, I guess, distilled down to a reliable method, right? That she believes is going to work? Because a lot of, you know, what she's telling us in the dialogue of this episode, a lot of her training, quote unquote, is sort of vague. It's like, well, you'll find out, you know, and it's up to everybody. And so I don't know. Do you guys think that's sort of where she is, where she's coming from? Do you think that she's got a method and we'll eventually find out? I mean, or do you think she's just sort of in this floating, like mystical, well, let's just kind of open ourselves up to the Force and see what happens sort of a thing?
I wonder if it's almost the latter. Yeah, because the only thing I would say on that is just that I've wondered about this myself, because like she, of course, says, if I've got this right, I think I do. The first episode of this, the first scene, which totally, by the way, I don't know if we've talked about this. I didn't get to follow up on episodes 1 and 2 yet from our coverage for this podcast. Whoever was on the last few episodes, but there's so many prequel vibes here, which makes sense, I think, because we're connecting across a huge arc here. She goes all the way back into that prequel timeline. But, you know, that first scene when Baylan and Shin show up on, they were on Home 1, weren't they? I think they, like, that's a Return of the Jedi.
Ship.
Was it
Home
different?
1
okay.
came later. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I was like, oh man, we're getting real close here. But they show up there clearly, like there's that like kind of episode 1 vibe to it, right? The Jedi supposedly coming, but and that scene that we all saw in the trailer with Baylan, you know, we are no Jedi. That's exactly what she said right before she fought Vader in Rebels. You know, when she's like, I am no Jedi. But when Dave introduced her into live action, the episode's title is The Jedi. Now, I don't know, like you could argue like that's what Mando thinks of her as, like the outsiders who don't know her story would assume she's a Jedi, but she's not really, like she's flying around with a Jedi droid. She's following Jedi protocol on a lot of things. So I don't know. I maybe she doesn't know. I mean, you know, I'll wait. I have a follow-up thought on the trust thing. I'll wait because I know we're going to talk later about the space battle, but I think that's obviously a big piece of it, right? You know, she's got some baggage, as anyone would. So I feel like she can't just leave it behind her. And here's what I hope. I just want to throw this out there. I hope that there's something similar going on with Baylan. Because I'm really intrigued with his character. Like he is probably, other than Thrawn's return and Ezra's return, the thing I'm most excited for is like, who is this dude?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think this show is going to delve a lot into Ahsoka's sense of identity as a Jedi or not. You know, I mean, she's connected with Luke Skywalker. We know that from the Book of Boba Fett, but she didn't stay with him to help rebuild the temple. She's doing this kind of Ronin thing, or from almost like some of the new High Republic books. There are Jedi called Wayseekers who kind of go out on their own and do their own missions in the far corners of the galaxy without a lot of, you know, oversight from the council. And of course now there's no council at all. There's just Luke and maybe, you know, a few others scattered about the galaxy. But I think Ahsoka is still processing where she stands, and you know, and I'm still a little bit like uncertain about, like, was it that the Jedi formally accepted her back but she said no? Right. Yeah, so it's like, in a way, she both is and isn't a Jedi. The Jedi recognized her as a Jedi again, but she didn't recognize herself as one. But yet she calls Sabine her Padawan and stuff. So yeah, I think that Ahsoka's on kind of her own journey of discovery to see where she fits. As Rey says in the sequels, where do I fit in all this?
Yeah.
Well, let's fly over to Hera's situation. And it was really good to see that Mike was going to be on this episode, because I know previously you had talked about how much your daughter connected with the character named Kaz from the animated series Star Wars Resistance, aka
I thought you might bring that up.
Kazuda Xiono. And his dad is on the show now as a New Republic senator. So that was a really neat surprise. Did you enjoy that?
I did. And honestly, what was so funny was there was some weird, like my wife and I were watching it right as Hera's going in, and I don't know if it was like, you know, my wife asked if I shut the garage door, or I asked her if she wanted like more popcorn. Like there was someone said something and missed, and then I had to catch it on the rewatch when that lieutenant or whoever, I forget who it was, who was telling Hera before she goes in, yeah, the senators are there with the chancellor, and you know, Senator Xiono's with her, you know, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, here we go. So it was kind of a fun tie-in. So longtime listeners to the show know that I've watched all of Resistance and I gave it a good shot, and I have some good things to say about it, but I wasn't super impressed with it. It was definitely my least favorite animated, you know, series for a number of reasons. But there was a lot that was neat to try to connect. Right. You know, the sort of get you prepped or kind of get you connected into that broader. I think it fleshed some things out for the sequel trilogy really well. And of course, the main character in Resistance, Kaz, is the son of this same senator. So I'm assuming Kaz would just be like a little toddler or whatever at this point of the timeline, you know, or maybe not even born yet. I don't know. Because he's pretty young in Resistance, which is essentially contemporary with the sequel. It's like a few months before the sequel trilogy or something. So yeah, that was cool though, seeing him, and he did not leave a very good impression on me.
Well, I remember him saying his dad was strict in the animated series, and I was like, yeah, I can see that.
Well, but Hera too, like challenging him, like that one line that hit me real hard was that whole like, did you fight in the war? And he's like, no. And she's like, just waited to see who, who got out on top. I'm like,
that was
ouch.
Interesting. Right, because I've not seen Resistance. My brother has, but based on what he's told me about it, it's interesting now that I understand that Kaz starts out his journey as a New Republic pilot, but that his dad really wants him to follow in the family business and get into politics and be a senator, but he ends up defecting to the Resistance. But now I understand why his dad made him join the New Republic Navy first before going into politics, because he has that kind of question mark. Good point too. That question mark on his record where it's like, I was not a veteran. I didn't really fight in the war. And some people held that against him. So he's like, I'm going to have my son have none of those issues.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, speaking of Hera, this was a scene where we really saw the general in her, right? Like if you know somebody in military or law enforcement, and I know, Mike, you're among those ranks where, personality can be really warm and witty, like when you're with friends and family and stuff. But when it comes down to business and somebody like insults their competence, it's like, no more Mr. Nice Guy,
Can I tell you guys a real quick story? I'm sorry. My brother, my dear brother, God rest his soul. He was in the Army as well. He passed away a couple years ago, and he told a story where he was an intel guy also, but he was like a senior or like a middle sort of range NCO. He was like a staff sergeant, and very, very skilled. He knew the streets. He knew their targets, all this kind of stuff. He knew the mission. And every now and then you have, an officer, might have a colonel, you might have someone who's, just not like he's playing some kind of game, or he's not quite really seeing it the way that you do from the ground. And he's trying to impress the higher ups. And General Ray Odierno was in charge in Iraq at the time. I think he was a 4-star. And my brother's in a briefing, and the colonel's there and the general's there, and they're briefing the general, and the colonel is giving all of this kind of just nonsense, try to impress the general kind of thing. And my brother's just losing his temper. And, the colonel's of course higher than him, but the general's the high guy. And the colonel gives this plan, and my brother's just standing there, and the general kind of looks at my brother, and my brother just flat out says, I'm sorry, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And he just said, and so I thought of him a little bit watching Hera's frustration of like, you have to, you're a servant of the greater good. Here's your superiors. They have this chain of command, but sometimes it's hard when you know the right thing and they're doing their thing, and you're like, did you fight in the war? I shouldn't have said that. So like, I just, that's a real kind of, there are those moments where that can break out.
Yeah, it was good to see that with Hera.
Yeah.
Thomas, what else struck you about the scene?
Yeah, what struck me is that a couple of things is that, definitely that you see Hera's commitment to obeying the orders of the civilian leadership. The New Republic is not a military junta. It's the politicians who make the decisions. And, as we would say in America, uphold the Constitution, and the military are the servants of the civilian government. But you can definitely see that, like, she's definitely not happy about this. And you can see what they're setting up, right? You can see how they're setting up for how the New Republic has these blind spots and sort of won't see the First Order festering out in the Outer Rim and in the unknown regions. In a way, it makes... I'm conflicted about it, because in one sense, it's kind of like you're like, this was the rebellion, and they fought and sacrificed just to put a sort of not very competent government in charge. I mean, obviously, miles better than the empire, totalitarian, fascist dictatorship. But because of the sequels, it's going to fall to fascism again.
Yeah.
And, and you're just like, it's like watching a slow motion train wreck. In that way, it's making Star Wars more hewing closer to real history. but less of that kind of fairy tale in space that the original movies kind of were. And like, as a history buff, it's interesting. Like I said, I'm conflicted about it. It's interesting to have it hew closer to history, but the lover of fairy tales in me is like, I kind of liked that happy ending at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Well, if I can throw one more quick thing in, it's amazing to me because there's so many neat parallels. You can jump across all different conflicts here because I'm thinking like this kind of New Republic, you could imagine Thrawn shows up and there's like this Neville Chamberlain type approach of like, let's hear him out. And then so I could imagine this guy. Well, he makes some good points. And there's some on the side like, stop it! Like, don't you guys? Did you forget what happened 10 years? Like, come on. But isn't that what always happens? I mean, that's the story of ancient Israel. Good gracious! Like you read the Old Testament. Like I'm always pulling my hair out the more I read the Old Testament because it's like, gosh, nothing changes. Ecclesiastes was right.
Well, it's like looking in a mirror, isn't it?
It is. Right? You get that. But I think that's the point too. Is that for us, like from a faith perspective, right? I keep looking at this where it's like some people might be like, oh, this is derivative, and we've just done this before, and I'm like, that's the point. It's like that's good storytelling because we never really learn the lesson. We don't ever really progress. Like it's the drama of sin and redemption in every generation.
It's like in history, the players change, but the plot is kind of basically the same. Or the old saw that like history doesn't really repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Yeah.
And we have these sort of similar things that happen. I wonder, though, if the New Republic will eventually get their Churchill. Somebody, maybe it'll be Hera. Like, I
would love to see literally Winston Churchill in Star Wars. That won't happen.
Maybe it'll be Chopper.
I'll have more World War II connections though later when we get to the space fight. But
let's get into that because it was great to finally get that, and I think it felt very much like something we would see in Rebels or Clone Wars, especially with Ahsoka leaving the ship and using her lightsabers in space, literally. In the stars.
I had a huge stupid grin on my face when I was during that whole scene.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the other thing that I liked was that intentionally, I think this was that Sabine is still rusty, right? And we see that she's still struggling. Although I really felt for her saying, oh, you got rid of my presets. It's like, you get rid of my shortcuts and stuff on my software. Forget about it. So, but okay. So Thomas, what did you want to bring up?
I don't know what they're called, but those little snub fighters that Shin and her squadron had looked like almost pre-World War II kind of 1920s, 1930s monoplanes. That sort of generation of fighters before, say, like the Spitfire or the Me-109, the classic World War II fighters. These looked very interwar period. All they were missing was the propeller prop in the front. And I liked that. Actually, they almost kind of looked like U.S. Navy Wildcats from the beginning of the Pacific War. They kind of had that squat shape with the stubby wings. And Star Wars has always, I mean, George Lucas looked at, World War II gun camera footage when he was storyboarding out the Death Star attack in the first movie. There's always been World War II influences in Star Wars, the Millennium Falcon having that kind of, and even Ahsoka's ship having that kind of B-29, cockpit module looking. It's like there's always been so much visual World War II reference. I mean, down to the fact that we have stormtroopers, like the Nazi stormtroopers. But I always love it as a World War II geek when Star Wars gets kind of in your face about how World War II in space it is.
Well, and I know episode 8, is very divisive for a lot of people, but and folks have probably heard this, but you might have forgot. I've never. It's just stuck in my head for some reason. But that opening scene in The Last Jedi when they have the bombers come in over the dreadnought and Rian Johnson, they specifically talked about how the idea, the aesthetic idea was the dreadnought. Yeah, they're in space. It's a ship, but it's meant to give the feel of a massive carpet bombing over a stationary World War II, site, or like, you bring your B-52s in, you get them in. It's like you're probably not going to make it home, and you're over top this gigantic munitions, factory in Germany that you managed to somehow get over, as opposed to a ship at sea. And boy, like when you look at it that way, like that was so well done, I think, with that, and like the clothes and stuff. So I got that vibe too here. And maybe you guys remember, I wanted to ask about this when you brought the ships up. Is there something in universe we've seen? Like I can't place it. Like Shin's ship in particular, I feel like there's something in universe we've seen though, and I can't think of what it looks like.
Many people have referenced Grievous's snub fighter, the soulless one,
yes,
as looking.
That's it.
I don't think it's the same. It might be made by like the same in-universe manufacturer.
That's
like,
the thing I was thinking of.
Model, but like, but it definitely evokes Grievous's fighter for me.
That was the one. Yeah, I couldn't think of what exactly. It's like it's something in that category. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and from what I gathered from this scene, it seems like the Eye of Sion is meant to be ridden to another galaxy. Like they can literally like ride this as a vehicle to another galaxy where they will find Thrawn, presumably dock his Star Destroyer to it, and then bring it back to the galaxy that we know. Is that kind of what you guys are picking up on as well, or what you're theorizing? Or are they going to make a ship here?
I don't think so, because I feel like it's all about the hyperdrives and how this can make this ring can make a jump, as opposed to something like a Stargate type thing, right, where I'm opening this portal and he's going to come back in. My biggest question with it is, how does this? I'm curious about how like Elsbeth, like how does Morgan Elsbeth have contact with him? Like it seems through some sort of Force-ish Night Sister thing.
Yeah.
But why does Thrawn have, like, what's his connection with that? He's been interested in the Force, but he talked about how it's always eluded him, and I can't stop thinking about, like, he's the whales are wrapped around him, and Ezra's wounded, and they make the jump. Well, what happens on the other side of that jump?
Yeah,
is Ezra still with him? Did he get away? Like, I'm so excited to find out.
Maybe Thrawn
this is 10 years later,
like,
almost
somehow controlled Ezra, and Ezra is like, like using the Force to send these signals to Morgan, but like, I don't know. I'm just coming up with this on the spot.
Well, and I mean, the fact is, like, the new Timothy Zahn, I was like, Zahn Thrawn, that rhymes. For some reason, I never thought of that. The Timothy Zahn, the new Thrawn books, like they're. I need to reread and re-listen to those, because there is canon here, of course, for like what he's all about. Because at the end of the day, Thrawn's not ultimately about the Empire; he's ultimately about the Chiss ascendancy, and that has to fit into this somehow. So I'm just, I don't know. I haven't talked to Father in a while. Father Fett and I need to get our Thrawn on here.
Right, yeah. Oh, and one quick thing about the Eye of Sion itself, and this is kind of like a nitpick thing, but it's like, what is with the bad guys in Star Wars and always trying to use turbo lasers to take out small ships, which we know turbo lasers are not good at. They never put a decent point defense grid on these giant super weapons. They're just like, take it out with turbo lasers. I'm like, those are for taking out other capital ships. And of course, Morgan's turbo lasers don't hit a thing. And so,
but they always think it will. She's standing there like, they're so cocky,
so
like
smug.
Yeah, she was like, I'm gonna get him. Like,
and I like now that the turbo lasers, another kind of visual World War II reference, the lasers just don't go off infinitely into space. They kind of explode into like World War II, like puffs of flak.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's
cool.
new. I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I maybe it has to do with power. Like they just like having the big gun, Like it's not about strategy, it's just about power.
Even though I would have disputed it in like episode, I think it was in episode 8, it looked cool though to see the arc. Remember like when they were shooting it, it was like going down. I'm like, well,
oh yeah.
It's like, I'm not a physicist, and that's not what this is about, because it's a space opera. It's not strictly sci-fi, but it looked cool.
There's definitely a rule of cool when it comes to Star Wars.
Effects, yes.
Oh yes.
Okay, so I know we're almost like out of time. I'm like totally amazed at that. But I want to talk about Baylan Skoll because, he doesn't really say much and literally does not like move. I don't think like he's just standing in the same one spot. But that face, like his countenance and the camera just stays on him for a while at the end. Is he planning something? Is he sensing Ahsoka's presence? Is he having thoughts about his past? Like, what is his deal? Do you have any theories about Baylan Skoll at this point?
I'm smiling because I don't know. At this point, at least in terms of our experience here on Secrets of Star Wars, Angela's like a sister to me, so I feel like I just have to pick on you a little bit sometimes. I've been waiting for this for a long time. I have my Snoke right here because
little Snoke figure. Yeah.
My little Snoke figure.
In the gold robe.
I always find a way to bring this up, but I could not believe that this opportunity arose. And I honestly didn't think of it when I was watching the show, though. But I saw a lot of people online pointing out that it looks like Baylan has maybe an obsidian ring, like Snoke has.
I caught
which
that.
Could be a connection to Mustafar. Like, this is all speculation, but in that, I heard someone online that made a really interesting point that I think would be kind of cool if something bears out with this, with possibly a Knights of Ren connection with him, which would be neat for sequel continuity. And the Knights do exist in canon at this point, and there's a whole thing with them in the comics I'm not super familiar with. But whether or not he's affiliated with them, as I said earlier, I really think that there's an opportunity here to have. I think there is a clear, they've shown it already. Like, there's a clear complexity with his character. Most especially, I thought, drawn out at the end of episode 2, where he's in the hologram. That was really neat, where she's like, he's like, she's coming. And it's almost like a tenderness. But then he's talking about, to kill her would be a shame, and she's like, what did she say? Sentimental. He's like, truth. And it's like, what? This guy's not Sith, but he's totally okay just like killing people. That's not an issue. They show that in the very first scene with him, which I thought was very interesting to start you off with this, like, wow, this guy's like off. Like, this is like Vader in the hallway in Rogue One. It's the same scene basically.
And he wants power. We know that.
Yeah. But like, what's it for? So I don't know. I mean, he's a contemporary-ish of Anakin. He might be a little bit older. I'm not sure. So I don't know. There's a chance we might get not War of the Worlds. Geez, world, maybe that too. World Between Worlds.
Yeah.
Is there something? Does he know about that? Does he want to change something in the past? Is there? It's hard to say what he's about. But I don't think it's clearly not like he has some personal vendetta against Ahsoka. I wonder if he's going to try to convince her of whatever he's into. So that's what I would guess is coming up.
Yeah,
that's
I'm pretty sure next episode we'll get probably one duel, most likely 2 duels.
I think that's from the trailer, the scene of them and the Stonehenge type thing from the trailer. I think that's coming up in 4 would be my guess.
We're going to get the duel between Baylan and Ahsoka, and I think there'll be a duel going on at the same time between Sabine and Shin, because we've seen those in the trailers as well.
And he mentions Anakin to her, which seems like, so that's coming up soon too.
I think, I really think that Baylan and Anakin were kind of in the same age cohort as like Jedi growing up in the temple, because he seems about that age that Darth Vader would have been at that time. And he mentions in one of the trailers, he says, few people lived to see what Anakin became. So he knows. He knows that Anakin is Vader.
And he doesn't seem happy that Anakin was Vader, even though he's doing evil things himself.
Yeah, exactly. And that, you said this, I think, towards the top of the program, Mike, but that to me, he's one of the most interesting characters because of how much we don't know about him. And that he's a very complex villain. And I like that he's not a Sith who just parrots the same old Sith ideology that they always do, and I like him. I think we're going to see some interesting things with his relationship with his apprentice, because I don't know if they have the same goals.
Right.
Really, and she's
I smell a redemption arc-ish for him, but not for her. And some conflict. I wonder.
She's very intense. She has, her kind of feral. She always looks feral all the time.
The mall vibes are clearly there, which is cool.
That one scene a couple episodes ago where it was like Maul in episode 1 where she's tracking with the probe droid. So I think they're definitely trying to call back to him in a way. And Maul wasn't a traditional Sith either. He kind of went off the Sith path and started doing his own thing. So it's these two characters, Baylan and Shin, who are to me two of the most interesting because of how little we know about them. And and how are they going to fit in when Thrawn finally does return? Where's their place, in this new empire or whatnot?
Yeah, I almost wonder if, maybe he's looking for Thrawn, but maybe he's really looking for Ezra, because I just thought it was interesting that, he knew that Ahsoka's former Padawan was Sabine Wren and where she was to be found. So, when you said World Between Worlds just now, I feel like they're telegraphing that to us with like the logo and the end credits scene and everything. It just feels so World Between Worlds to me. But I'm wondering if maybe Baylan knows about the World Between Worlds, but he wants access to it. So maybe he knows that Ezra was the last person to successfully get access to the World Between Worlds, and he knows Ahsoka has, and he knows that Sabine has something to do with it, how she helped with the artwork and everything. So I don't know. I'm thinking now to myself, perhaps he wants the power to be able to control that. Like that's the unlimited power beyond your imagination that he was describing to Shin. I don't know.
I heard someone speculate, does he want to somehow stop Anakin's turn? Because everything went, cool. And I was like, dude, that would be really interesting.
And that would hit Ahsoka right
that would tempt
her. That would tempt her.
What do you do? Right. What do you do? Do you let him do it? Because then, but like, look what's come from it. Because Anakin was redeemed. But I don't know, maybe he doesn't know that. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be maybe a moment where Ezra was tempted to, save his master, and Ahsoka was the one who coached him to let him go. Right. And perhaps the tables will turn and she will be tempted to save her master, and maybe he will have to coach. I don't know.
She knows she feels guilty that she wasn't there when he needed her the most.
Exactly.
Wow.
She still can't accept, like she says to him, like, I thought I was, thinking of, who you were to Vader or whatever. She says something, but like my master could never have been as vile as you. And then that moment with the like Ahsoka and like his mask is broken, and that's so traumatic for her. Like when she really has to accept who he is, just like it was for Obi-Wan, right? In the Kenobi show, that was so brilliant to have it. I think it was the other side of the mask. The poor guy keeps getting his mask broken, but that echo keeps showing up. The people have to face this, like, he did what he did. He made the choice he made.
Yeah, accepting that.
Can I ask you guys just a real quick question with the same thing? Is like, if you had to choose, I hope they do both. If you had to choose between a flashback or like a World Between Worlds thing, flashback-ish with Anakin, prequel era, Hayden Christensen, but filmed more recently, versus like Force Ghost Anakin now, because I'm kind of torn. I hope we get both, quite frankly, but I don't know what we're gonna get with him. We know he's in the show, but I was just wondering what you guys thought.
I'm a sucker for World Between Worlds, and actually I have to say, I thought, because everyone said, oh, in episodes 1 and 2 we saw like everything in the trailer, and I had not seen any of the trailers because I wanted to keep myself spoiler free. So then I was like, oh, so now I can finally watch the trailer. Well, now I've seen everything that you guys have talked about. Like I didn't know that Anakin was going to be in it, and like all these other things.
Right.
So I'm sort of like, man, why? But anyway, here we are.
Trailers always spoil stuff.
Of course, that's kind
no,
of
but I mean, at a certain point, I was getting annoyed, and I usually watch all the trailers, and I was like, when they had the one with Anakin's voiceover in it, I'm like, come on, guys, I didn't want to know that.
Yeah, that's a huge. Yeah. Okay, but I have to say, last podcast, I did say that I wanted to see them bring Jason Syndulla into the show.
Yeah.
And this episode, he was there. So I win.
Which I of course immediately was like, please don't let him join Luke's Jedi Academy. I'm always like going there, like, don't go over here.
Yeah. So we have yet to see where he's going. I'm sure Disney is ready and willing to make more merchandise related to Jason. Okay, so we've got to wrap it up here, but if you had like one or two other things that you really wanted to mention before we wrap up, what would it be? Mike, go.
You had down music, and all I wanted to say is I said Clone Wars meets Rebels meets Star Wars feature films meets Beethoven's Seventh in A major.
Whoa, okay.
Because that Ahsoka theme, that like dun 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 dun, I was like, that's Beethoven. I was like, that sounds like. So there's a little similarity there, but I love the music and Hera's theme. I love it. Like, I think Kevin Kiner, for me, I love Ludwig. I love all the music. I think Kevin is the most consistent, broader kind of tie-in, and I think he's the best successor to John Williams. So that's my piece.
Agreed.
Two things I'll mention. One, cool to see Purgles in live action.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
that was really cool. And my one last prediction for next time is that despite the fact that Hera has to obey her superiors in not bringing the fleet, I believe that Hera will swoop in with the Ghost at the last minute to save Ahsoka and Sabine if their duels go sideways.
Totally.
Cool. I like it. All right. Well, what about all of you out there? We want to hear your feedback, your questions, your comments, your observations, any Star Wars, but especially Ahsoka series. And shout out to Mark, who left us a comment on YouTube pointing out that the actress portraying Hera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, is the real-life spouse of Ewan McGregor as of 2022. So he said, talk about a Star Wars power couple. And I have to agree. That's amazing. So if you want to send us some stuff, you can email us starwars@sqpn.com or find StarQuest on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Leave a comment, or you can simply write to us on the app formerly known as Twitter at SQPN. If you are interested in joining us on our online community on Discord, we've got over 800 fans of SQPN over there. You can just go to sqpn.com/Discord to join us on our server. And we continue to cover the Ahsoka series. So subscribe to Secrets of Star Wars in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or on our SQPN YouTube channel. And previous episodes can be found at sqpn.com/Star Wars.
This StarQuest show is brought to you in part by Sam Castry Law, LLC, focusing on business and entertainment law in the greater Chicagoland area and intellectual property law across the U.S. Learn more by visiting castrylaw.com, CASTREE law.com. Licensed to practice in Illinois and before the United States Trademark Office.
Phew, okay, that was a full discussion. So until next time that we have to look forward to this, Thomas Salerno, thank you for joining the crew today.
Thank you, and may the Force be with you.
And Mike, thanks for sharing your Ahsoka super fandom as well.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
And once again, I am the one in the middle, the Bendu, Angela Sealana. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Find the show wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/mysterious.